There exists a crop that shatters every assumption of modern industrial agriculture. It produces more nutritious food per acre than potatoes. It withstands freezing temperatures that would obliterate wheat fields. And once you plant it just one time, you never need to purchase seed again. It regenerates on its own, year after year after year, forever. For thousands of years, spanning countless generations, this remarkable plant served as humanity's insurance policy against starvation and famine. A living, breathing backup plan buried safely in the soil, waiting to save lives. Then, almost overnight in historical terms, we systematically erased it from our collective memory and agricultural practices, not because it failed to deliver on its promise, but because it succeeded too brilliantly, too independently. A crop that feeds people without requiring permission from authorities, that spreads and multiplies without financial cost, that cannot be patented, owned, or monopolized, is fundamentally dangerous to certain systems of power. And what cannot be owned by corporations cannot be controlled by those who profit from scarcity. This is the extraordinary story of the crop that proved too powerful, too independent, too generous to keep in our modern food system. A perennial survivor that outlasted the rise and fall of empires, endured the devastation of 2 world wars, and still waits patiently beneath our feet, ready to feed us again. Welcome to Origins of Earth Vault. Before we unlock this particular vault and reveal its secrets, if these forgotten stories of ancestral wisdom matter to you, if you believe humanity's survival depends on remembering what we've lost, then preserve them. Subscribe to this channel, ring the notification bell, share this archive with someone who believes that old knowledge, tested by time and hardship, should never be allowed to die. The historical record begins on the eastern coast of North America in the early years of the 1600s. A French explorer arrives on foreign shores and is welcomed with extraordinary hospitality by indigenous people who prepare a generous feast. Among the many unfamiliar dishes presented is a strange knobby root vegetable, sweet in flavor, crisp in texture, unlike anything the European palate has ever experienced. He writes enthusiastically in his journal that it rivals the finest, most prized artichokes cultivated in the gardens of France. Amazed by this discovery, he fills his ship's cargo hold with the tubers and sails back home across the Atlantic. The plant carries a scientific name, Helianthus tuberosus. Today, in farmers' markets and specialty stores, we call it the sunchoke, or Jerusalem artichoke. Long before any Europeans set foot on these continents, native nations across North America already understood its extraordinary power and potential. Some tribes preserved and passed down a sacred story. When Earth Woman died while giving birth to twins, the very first sunchokes grew from her fallen body, a precious food born directly from sacrifice and divine love. The plant rises dramatically, growing taller than a full-grown man, crowned magnificently with brilliant yellow sunflowers that track and follow the sun's path across the sky. But its real treasure, its true gift to humanity, remains hidden underground where eyes cannot see. Clusters of irregular tubers form beneath the soil, storing concentrated energy, not as simple starch like potatoes, but as inulin, a complex sugar that feeds the human body slowly and steadily, while simultaneously nourishing the gut's protective colonies of beneficial bacteria. Indigenous communities across the continent planted it once in their lifetimes and harvested abundantly from it for multiple generations. Underground rhizomes spread outward like intricate veins through the earth, transforming a single modest patch into a permanent, self-renewing food reserve. Entire villages could depend on it reliably year after year, season after season, without ever replanting a single tuber. When the famous explorers Lewis and Clark nearly starved to death while crossing the harsh Great Plains, it was indigenous knowledge and generosity that saved their expedition from disaster. Hidden underground caches of sunchokes, carefully gathered and stored by small animals, became emergency survival food. Roasted over fires, boiled in pots, dried and ground into nutritious flour, the resilient tubers waited patiently beneath frozen soil, ready to sustain life. A single mature plant can produce several pounds of edible food. A full acre planted with sunchokes can dramatically out-yield wheat in cold northern climates. Later scientific studies would eventually confirm what ancient farmers already knew through generations of careful observation. This crop was specifically built by nature for survival under the harshest conditions. When sunchokes finally reached Europe through trade routes, the continent was utterly exhausted by recurring waves of famine. Agricultural soils were dying from overuse and poor practices. Harvests failed with terrifying regularity. Potatoes were still feared, misunderstood, and viewed with deep suspicion by conservative populations. But the sunchoke spread rapidly across the countryside. It required virtually no fertilizer, demanded little care or attention, and miraculously replanted itself automatically each season. Peasant families embraced it gratefully. Livestock thrived remarkably when fed on it. Even wealthy kings incorporated it into their royal banquets. But the plant possessed fundamental flaws in the calculating eyes of empire and emerging capitalism. Its tubers grew irregular and unpredictable in shape. They proved difficult to harvest with mechanical equipment, hard to store long-term in warehouses without spoilage. The potato, smoother, larger, more uniform, easier to control and commodify, eventually replaced it in mainstream agriculture. The developing systems of taxation, centralized storage, and commercial agriculture heavily favored crops that fit neatly into warehouses and standardized profit models. The wild, independent sunchoke simply didn't fit these requirements, so it was deliberately pushed aside and marginalized. In North America, European settlers dismissively called it a common weed. They strongly preferred crops that demanded annual seed purchases from suppliers, crops that could be easily bought, sold, taxed, and regulated by authorities. The resilient sunchoke retreated quietly to roadsides, fence lines, and forgotten corners of abandoned farmland, waiting patiently for humanity to remember. Then catastrophic war arrived in Europe. During the brutal First World War, Germany found itself completely cut off from vital food imports by naval blockades. The devastating winter of 1916 became known throughout history as the Turnip Winter. Mass starvation spread rapidly through cities. In hidden fields and wild, overgrown patches, sunchokes quietly saved countless lives. They couldn't be blockaded by enemy navies. They grew abundantly without government permission or corporate approval. The Second World War brought even worse horrors. In Nazi-occupied Europe, food supplies were systematically seized to feed advancing armies. Desperate civilians survived on whatever remained in the fields: rutabagas, wild plants, and sunchokes. For long, terrible years, millions of people ate them daily as their primary source of calories. The humble vegetable that kept entire families alive through occupation became psychologically associated with profound suffering, deprivation, and trauma. After liberation and the war's end, traumatized survivors refused to eat it ever again. An entire generation connected the plant indelibly with hunger, death, and occupation. It vanished almost completely from cultural memory within a single generation. But its fundamental biology never changed. The nutrient-dense tubers contain concentrated minerals essential for human health: potassium, iron, magnesium in abundant quantities.
prebiotic fiber that feeds protective gut bacteria, inulin that naturally stabilizes blood sugar levels. Scientific studies conducted decades later would demonstrate improved digestion, stronger immune system response, and possible protection against chronic inflammatory diseases. And remarkably, the plant actively heals damaged land. Its deep, penetrating roots break apart compacted soil layers. It requires no destructive tilling that causes erosion, no topsoil loss. It thrives impressively in drought conditions, poor, degraded soil, and freezing winters where annual crops completely collapse. It was designed by evolution for chaos and instability. In the progressive 1980s, innovative chefs rediscovered it with excitement. Specialty markets rebranded it with appealing names. High-end restaurants praised its unique flavor profile, nutty, sweet, luxuriously creamy when properly cooked. Independent farmers experimented enthusiastically with growing it to break free from corporate agricultural supply chains. The economics failed predictably, not because the crop itself was weak or inadequate,